Well, I was a fanatic. There's no doubt a fanatic. My goal was to get carried out of the wrestling room because of exhaustion, and it never happened. The thing it did for me every day about 6 o'clock is that when I got out, I looked back in and there was nobody else there. Bottom line was I didn't reach my goal. So guess what happened? I went back in the room again. But I got some quality time because of just some kind of a fanatic goal.
Welcome back to the show, folks. This is Wrestling Changed My Life, and your host, Ryan Warner. And the mission of this podcast, folks, is we interview former wrestlers to understand how the sport changed their life, and also to understand what techniques, what routines, what mindset techniques are they using to get the most out of their life. So not all of the guests will be former elite level athletes like today's is. Some may be business leaders, some may be CEOs, some may be politicians, but bottom line, all of the guests have had a positive impact from being involved in the sport of wrestling, even if it's just a year in middle school. Now, today's guest, though, is a former elite level athlete. Nate Gallick was an NCAA champion at Iowa State. He was also a U.S. Open champion shortly thereafter. He's just an all-around bad dude, and we really hope you enjoy this episode. For past episodes, please go to WrestlingChangeMyLife.org, where you can find all of the past episodes and show notes for those episodes. And then also, please subscribe to us on iTunes and leave a rating if you enjoy it. All right, I've said my piece. That's it. Now, please sit back and enjoy this episode with Nate Gallick. See you again soon. Take care.
Rewinding to, going into the NCAA finals your senior year, you were undefeated and wrestling a guy who at that point you'd wrestled 8 times before in Tianware. And your only loss, you were 7-1 against him. Your only loss was to him in the NCAA finals before. Kind of looking back on that, what do you remember of those battles with Tian?
Man, they were looking back. It seemed like it was a lot more fun than maybe at the time. They were tough. They were tough matches, and I'd say very strategic. There was a lot of planning around, how I would wrestle him. He was a great athlete. Very quick, great defense, and when he needed to attack, he did have some strong attacks. So it was important that when I went out there, that I had a game plan, or Bobby would call it a match plan. And so, I would have already wrestled 4 or 5 matches in my head. And maybe previously in the week had someone kind of emulate his style. So that was kind of the preparation that would go into some of those bigger matches, and not just for him, but I took that approach with really any solid opponent that I felt like could potentially be a threat in that way. But yeah, they were some fun and exciting matches, maybe more so than the score always showed. I know we had a lot of 3-2 matches, a couple overtimes, and maybe a few that ventured outside of the 3-2. But every point that was scored for either one of us was usually pretty hard fought.
And did it get in your head a little bit that, going into the finals your senior year, undefeated, last chance to win, and you'd wrestled him so many times before. Was there something different about that, like your mental approach to that match, than you take for? Because I know anytime two wrestlers wrestle each other a bunch of times, it seems like it just kind of can play mind games sometimes. So did that ever affect you?
It did. There were matches, maybe that I was a little more nervous than others for. I felt very confident in, I guess I should say, my defense. I felt like, if I could get out, 1 or 2 offensive attacks and score, that I'd be very hard to beat. I didn't think there was anybody in the country, and at certain parts of my career, I didn't think there was anybody in the world that could take me down or score on me. And so having that confidence that, I knew I wasn't going to be taken down. I knew I could get out from the bottom. It was just a matter of finding an opportunity to get an attack off or score. But I'd say that particular match, there was no, in my head, there was just no way I was going to lose. You know, and I know it ended up being a 3-2 match, but you know, from a confidence level, I felt very confident. And that was probably the last 2 years of my college career that, you know, I tried to prepare for each match, each tournament, you know, day in, day out. So that way, when it came time to step on the mat, it wasn't, am I going to win? It was, is the score going to be 3-2, 10-5? It just, you know, how many points am I going to win by? Not necessarily, am I going to win?
And so this is something you thought about in and out of the season, obviously. It was a daily thing for you, just constantly obsessing about it and preparing your mind and obviously your body throughout those last 2 years where there was no other option for you than to win.
Yeah, I mean, it was. And one of the things that, you know, I really focused on was, and this is, again, more so the second half of my college career, was in my head, you know, if I was training to make a world team or win a world title or an Olympic team or Olympic title, then by default, the NCAA title would come. And so when I trained during the college season, I wasn't necessarily training every day to win an NCAA title. You know, I was looking beyond. And so my goals were always beyond, you know, an All-American or an NCAA champ. And so that helped me kind of get by. And I think just generally speaking, from a fundamental standpoint, it forced me to be a better, more well-rounded wrestler in college than maybe most of your, you know, typical college athletes.
Because you were just training for that world stage versus just the national stage? Is that where you're kind of getting at?
Yeah, yep, exactly.
Okay.
Just, you know, I wrestled, I think, 11 months out of the year from the time I was a freshman in college. You know, I was at the training center, whether it was junior worlds, university worlds, senior nationals. I mean, I wrestled as many international events as I possibly could and surrounded myself with as many postgraduate successful wrestlers as I could to make sure that, you know, whether I was in college or out of college, that I was ready for that next step. And so from a daily training standpoint, I didn't necessarily set my goal to be an NCAA champ. I set it to be an Olympic champ. And if I fell short, hopefully the NCAA title would fall in my lap. You know,
and how
luckily
early
I did,
back in your,
finally my senior year.
Yeah. I mean, unbelievable run. I remember it very vividly. But I mean, it sounds like you were a guy just possessed and on a mission. I mean, how early back into your youth or into your high school days did you know that, all right, my sole focus during my competitive career is to earn a world title? Like, when did that start for you?
So, you know, it sounds funny because it was, you know, I think every young wrestler or every young wrestler should, when they first start, you know, look at it and say, okay, my goal is, you know, you look at what's the best that I can possibly do. And, you know, in our sport, I would think it's to be an Olympic champion. And in my mind, even as a young athlete, that's what I wanted to do. And maybe at that time it wasn't reality or realistic. It was just kind of a stretch goal. And so in my mind, that was what I was training for. And then along with that, there were milestones, you know, whether it be to win your first tournament, win your first match, state title, you know, high school national title, et cetera, et cetera. And that was just kind of always where my mindset was. You know, my family is a bit weird and odd. And, thankfully, they're like that. But when we got into wrestling, I didn't start wrestling until 6th grade. It was my first or second tournament. It was Tulsa Nationals. You know, we drove from Arizona,
Wow.
we went to Oklahoma. You know, so everything that my family does, you're either all in or not at all. We had wrestling mats in the living room instead of furniture, and it just that's how my family is. And my dad, in baseball, we had pitching machines in our garage. So I was 0-2 at the Tulsa Nationals, my first tournament. I felt kind of bad for my dad, and I think I maybe even mentioned, you know, I apologized. All these other parents were sending in, you know, pit bulls, and he's sending in a poodle.
Yeah, that's a brutal tournament for your first tournament. My God.
Yeah, but no, it was, and when I look at the reason that I went to Iowa State instead of Arizona State at the time, which were kind of my main two options, when Bobby Douglas came to Arizona and sat in my living room, he sold me on, it was an 8-year plan. He said, I'm not looking to have you come in and go to school for 4 or 5 years and be a national champ. He said, my goal, if this is what you want, my goal is to get you through 2 Olympic cycles, and if this is your goal, everything else in between are mile markers. So that's kind of where a lot of that started. And, it impressed me that he recognized more than just college, and he was willing to be there before, during, and after for my dreams and everything that I wanted. So that was, I guess, the start of it. But he's a huge part of the mental focus and preparation for what I did day to day.
Yeah, that guy's, obviously a legend, 2-time Olympian, multiple-time world medalist, won the first national title, I think ever for a team, maybe not ever, but one of the first times a team outside of the state of Iowa or Oklahoma had won the nationals when he won at Arizona State in '88. So he had a lot of street cred in Arizona, I'm sure. That's a guy who had a huge impact in your life. What have you learned most from him? Maybe just talk about the impact he's had on your life.
So it's funny. I probably, outside of my dad, he's probably, the second most impactful person in my life, and someone that I really, really respect, and not just as a wrestling coach, because I think a lot of coaches, they care about the athletes and they do what they can to support them. But I always felt like Coach Douglas or Bobby had, he truly cared. I guess to sum it up, 2 quick stories. He would beat us up in the room. Verbally, sometimes you'd get to the point where you feel like you just broke mentally. You'd want to walk out of the room. You think your coach hates you. He thinks you're a grade school wrestler. And he'd call you that night and he'd say, hey, you're doing great, and here's what I think. He'd kind of build you back up. He'd tell you what you wanted to hear, so you could come in the next day and get back at it. So that was just something. He knew when to push you, when to break you, and he knew how to build you back up, which a lot of coaches struggle with that. I think just knowing the balance and pushing you far, but maybe not too far, and then being able to pull you back to life. The other thing is, when I lost at the NCAA's my junior year, I remember going to the locker room, and I truly felt, the pain that I felt, he felt. He wasn't upset that I lost. He didn't care. It wasn't about him. He was heartbroken for me, because he knew how hard we had trained together to achieve that. And just small little things like that, it just it makes a difference from an athlete, and now a great friend. I still try to keep in touch with him as much as possible.
The guy's obviously a legend in the sport. Do you remember any stories in particular where you had a tough practice and maybe even broke? Do you remember any specific stories about that?
Yeah. So it was, I think I'm trying to remember if this was it was my sophomore, and I lost. We had a home opener, and typically, when you're Iowa State and you have Mankato State and Boston as a multi-duel, those are like we're just warming up into the season matches.
Yeah.
Well, I went 0-2 on those duels, and I remember one lost a match. I can't even recall their names, but one was like stalling call at the end, and the other one, I think I got cement mixered right, in the end of the third period. They were just terrible losses for me to experience, especially that early on. And I think for about 2 days straight, and it might even have been like the next day on a Sunday, where I don't think I could get 2 feet in the practice room without him just gnawing on me, you know, and then he would after practice grab me and, you know, he's whether it's like arm drags or wrist control or whatever it was, but just nonstop. Like, yeah, you'd be sitting in the corner just, you know, MFing and thinking, you know, gosh, this guy is, you know, what does he know? You know, but no, he just beat me up for about a week straight. And shortly after that, maybe a month after, I think, or Iowa Duel, one of my first big wins, or maybe the turning point of my college career, was the dual meet against Iowa, where we actually beat Iowa for the first time in 20 years or however many years. I had wrestled Cliff Moore. I think I might have been ranked 20th, or maybe not even ranked at all. Cliff Moore, I think, was maybe ranked 3rd or 4th for the year, and that's so I'd beaten him. And then after that, I think kind of snowball effect started taking place throughout the year. Shortly after that, I had, you know, beaten Tion, who was the returning national champ, and revenged a previous loss with Dylan Long at the time, who was the returning runner-up. And so that was kind of the start of everything. But a lot of that it stemmed from that extreme pressure that he had put me through for about a good 2 weeks after those losses.
I mean, that's an incredible story, because when you were at Sunnyside High School in Arizona, multiple-time state champ, had success on the national level, but then to your point, you came in and took some lumps. I think you went like 500 your freshman year. We're up at 149 at one point, but then wrestled freestyle that summer at, you know, somewhere in the 132, 133 range. Had success in freestyle, but yeah, I mean, I can only just imagine how tough that must have been to know how good you were and how much success you'd had, but just wasn't clicking in college right away.
Yeah, so that freshman year, man, I really that made me question whether or not I was as good as I thought I was. So I did sit behind. So Aaron Holker, which was the returning national champ at 141, was cutting a lot of weight to make 41. You know, the idea was he would go up to 49. I would wrestle 41. Well, he thought otherwise. Beat me out in the wrestle off, so I was forced to wrestle 49. Coaches thought at some point during the season that he would decide to bump up just from not wanting to cut weight. So I was weighing in at 141. He would come in on a Monday and he would be, you know, probably just shy of 160 pounds. And in the off season, he would probably get maybe north of that, but he was definitely a big 41 pounder. At the time, maybe wasn't the most disciplined either. So his weight would balloon back and forth.
So they thought he might go up to 49 and then you might go down to 41, but what happened?
So he didn't. He kept making the weight at 41. I was weighing in at 41 and wrestling 49, just so I could keep certification. And so it was a struggle. And I was pretty small. I mean, I was recruited into college as a 25 pounder. You know, most of the years that I wrestled 41, I barely weighed 46 on a Monday, 47 maybe. So I didn't cut a lot of weight through college. That's how I was able to wrestle 132 or 60 kilograms in the off season. So 149 was definitely, you know, I was getting all that I could handle, you know, from an overall strength and maturity level as a freshman. And I think I'm trying to remember the worst beating that I had that year had to have been Jared Lawrence. And I can't remember if it was a tech fall or maybe I hung on to the buzzer, but man, he got on top of me and I think he turned me like I'd never been turned.
So you're having obviously a tough go at it in the matches, but then in the room, Zach Roberson was the national champ at 133. Holker was at 141. I mean, so were you like hanging with these guys at least, or was it just equally as tough in the room every day?
Yeah, no, I was holding my own in the room, and you know, Zach and I he's probably the best training partner that I had at Iowa State through the years and even after. So it was great training. Now I'd say in the room, if we were on our feet, you know, Aaron Holker and I would be fine. I would hold my own. He's probably one of the best mat wrestlers that I've ever wrestled. If he got on top of me or anyone in the room, it was probably, upwards of 30 minutes of just getting cranked on or, having the legs thrown in on you. So he definitely helped my mat skills. You had to get better. Otherwise it was just going to be painful and long. But no, the training situation that I had, and looking back on it, because Cody Sanderson was still there at that time, and we had Dwight Henson was just coming off of his competition years, maybe the tail end. Zach Roberson, Matt Azevedo, when I was a freshman, was there. I think he had just left maybe that year. But we had a ton of really good lightweights in the room. I mean, Ty Malia, Grant Nakamura, I don't know if you remember, but so from a lightweight standpoint, we had great training partners. Harry Lester probably would have just taken off and went to Michigan to train Greco full time. But we definitely didn't have any shortage of good partners in the room. And depending on the day, you either took some lumps or you gave a few. But it was just a great training situation.
And what were those practices like? Was it mostly live and just a grind, or more technical? I mean, give us some insight into the cycle and room in the mid-2000s.
Yeah, so Bobby did a really good job of, I would say, kind of organizing the season, and we definitely didn't just wrestle live or go through, grind. We didn't do maybe a ton of grind matches, if you will, but practices were definitely long. He is infamous for, all right, last thing, last drill, one more thing, and pretty soon it's an hour later. And so from a technical standpoint, I mean, we did a lot of technique, a lot of drilling. We didn't necessarily stop the practice and circle up to watch technique. It would kind of just flow, all right, look, break, look in, boom, boom, boom. And you kind of either kept up or you didn't. It wasn't that he wouldn't help or show technique or break it down. It's just, you kind of had to keep up. And so being young, it was important to pay attention during the room. And then if you needed extra, that you were vocal about it. Hey, coach, would you mind coming in and doing a morning drill or running through a couple items? But from a fundamental standpoint, I mean, we drilled fundamentals over and over and over again. And some of these things, when I do wrestling clinics, we go through these fundamentals, and some of the little kids are like, why are we doing this? And I'm like, trust me, I asked the same thing and I was in college.
Right.
But it works. And if you can master the fundamentals of anything, the other technique comes. And I'm not to call it junk technique, but I mean, if you watch, just recently watched the Worlds, and
right.
You get one or two good scoring opportunities in most matches, but what are they scoring on? Doubles, singles, hard snaps, controlling the mat, really good head position.
A lot of high crotches. Yeah. Basic stuff, though, you're right.
Yeah. So that was.
And so was Cale around during these times? Because he had won in 2004 and you won your nationals in 2006. So I'm guessing there's probably some overlap. Was that experience? Was he there at all, or was he at Colorado Springs at this time?
No, Cale was. He would train in Colorado Springs or travel, just like most of the guys that are on the circuit now throughout the season. But Cale was there up until, I guess it would have been maybe right before I left to Chattanooga when he took over after Bobby. But Cale was in the room, and I think just being able to see him train, and man, did he work hard. He'd be in there, whether it be during our practice or shortly before. He did train a lot. He trained hard and set a good example for those around him.
Well, and he's obviously a guy where an unbelievable wrestler, but probably even a better coach, what he's doing at Penn State. And he reminds me of Belichick. He's very tight-lipped. You don't really get to understand what's going on in there, which is a shame because the Penn State guys just perform at such a high level, and they're so loose all the time. You'd love to understand what type of mental coaching or mental skills they're working on. But what do you think? What do you think separates him as a coach just from when you were working with him?
I think he understands. Maybe from an individual basis, like he understands the sport, and I think he has a system that he works within, and he doesn't really deviate a whole lot from that. He surrounds himself with great assistants. Casey, Cody, which I would argue to say they're probably two of the best in the country. Would easily be head coaches somewhere else. And just between them as a group, it's hard not to connect with an athlete one way or the other. I know just from an expectation standpoint, he definitely expects a lot. And I guess I'll give you a quick story on this, but I remember I was a senior, and of course I thought I knew it all, undefeated and getting close to the NCAAs. And I don't remember if Bobby said, run 10 sprints after practice or whatever it was. Well, Cale must have been paying attention, and I'm sure I maybe only ran 7. But I remember him following me to the locker room, and he just said, "Hey, Keon just gained 4 seconds of riding time on you." And that was it. And he walked out and left. He just left it up to me to interpret that, how I wanted. And, I remember just kind of thinking and it kind of, as an athlete, especially you're a senior,
definitely
maybe thinking you're better than you are. And yeah, but exactly. And it's, those are the things, he didn't stand there and grab you and force you to go do the extra 2 sprints. He told you, and he let you kind of mull on it, and he gave you the opportunity to find your own answer. And so I think those are the things, and that was even as a young age. He was just an assistant. I think as you develop, especially if you're willing to be patient and lead your athletes to the answer instead of, doing it for them or forcing them to do something that's not their idea. And I think that from an outsider looking in now, that may be something that he's had success with, and you can tell the athletes at Penn State they're having fun, but the athletes that they recruit love the sport. And those are the things that you can't teach. If you love the sport and you're living a lifestyle that's conducive to having success, it's a heck of a lot easier to have fun and to find success.
Yeah, obviously recruiting highest caliber of the highest caliber. But a lot of programs get good high school kids. Ohio State, Oklahoma State, Iowa State obviously on the rise, but the traditional programs are getting good kids, but it just seems like that notion of burnout or the grind, maybe they don't feel it there, and maybe they do, but we just don't see it. That's why I wish we could have more of an inside view into that. But that, going back to your story, though, he knew you didn't do the 10 sprints. He could have yelled at you and got in your face, but he didn't even say, I didn't even know. He didn't say, I know you didn't do those sprints. He just said, hey, man, your competition's gaining on you. So those little mind tricks like that, that's fascinating. He does that. Any other Cale stories that come to mind just before we move into some more rapid fire questions here?
Other than maybe just I'd say he's I don't know if he still is, but he used to be pretty darn good at video games. His whole family, they're a phenomenal family. Tyler, Cody, the whole group of them. And I don't know many people that would be able to say a bad thing about them. So they got a great thing going in Penn State, and
definitely
the rest of us have to figure out how to catch up and compete.
Well, and even with the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club, the endowment they have, and the fact that those guys can make $50-60 grand a year and train is awesome. So it's just good for the sport. And I'm a huge fan of how those guys wrestle. Like a Null or a Bo Nickel, just wide open the whole time. Awesome to watch. It's exciting too. Super exciting.
It is, and I think in kind of going back, to what you had mentioned about recruiting and getting the top talent, and I think from a recruiting standpoint, there's a difference between, a talented wrestler that had success in high school versus, a wrestler that truly loves the sport. And even a lesser athlete coming out of high school that loves the sport, that has the ability to be self-motivated, and I go back to, is it Yanni from Cornell had mentioned something, when he was interviewed, just in regards to, just loving the sport, being, a student of the sport, watching videos, not just recent videos, but videos from the 90s, the early 2000s, and taking little bits and pieces of technique from various athletes. When you can't, as a coach, you can't tell someone to do that. They either do it and enjoy it and like it, or they don't, and you can tell that he loves the sport. He's naturally a student of the sport. He will continue to get better, and his trajectory is going to be a lot more steep than someone who had success in high school, maybe because their high school coach or parents pushed them. And maybe he was good because of what other people helped him do, but not necessarily like, what did you do when someone wasn't looking? How disciplined were you? Did you have these goals, or were these goals that were set for you? And I think that's kind of the biggest difference. And I feel like a lot of the recruits and athletes that I see at Penn State, they're good, they've had success, but they love it. I don't think anybody's forcing them to do it, and they're finding ways to get better. And once you get one or two of those athletes, then everybody starts to rub off on each other. So I think that's kind of the hardest thing to find and recruit. But once you have it, man, it's like a snowball.
Yeah, huge fan of Yanni D. I think he'll be challenging for an Olympic team spot in 2020. I really love watching that kid wrestle. But hey, as we wind this down, I'd love to kind of hit on something you were just kind of segueing to, and that's, loving the sport. If you had to summarize why you love wrestling so much, or what drove you through all those tough times, what is it about the sport that just pulled you in and you really hooked you?
So, early on, I loved it just because of the fight, and I happened to be mildly athletic, from a God-given standpoint, and so I had success early on. And if you have success, you start to like something. But when I look back and think about where I'm at now in my professional career, and the reason that I'm where I'm at, wrestling offers, discipline, accountability. You have to be extremely resilient. You build confidence, and then more than anything, you learn how to cope with failure. And I think that's something that, maybe people that don't wrestle or aren't in an individual sport where you truly get taken down and beat with no one else to blame, you have to learn how to cope with that and bounce back. And I think that, whether you're an Olympic athlete or whether you're just a wrestler in elementary or middle school, if you can learn to be disciplined, to set goals, small goals or large goals, and achieve them, you're already ahead from the general population of the world. And to be able to take a failure, train hard, come back, and have success, those are things that are going to stick with you for life. And that's kind of where I'm at right now in my current job. And we recruit and we headhunt a lot of athletes and wrestlers specifically because of that. It's a heck of a lot easier to train someone to do a job and set goals for them if they've had a lifetime of achieving goals already and holding themselves accountable to hit and meet those goals.
I think, to your point, though, as much as anything, and why I love the sport so much, and why a lot of business people who used to wrestle are successful, is that it teaches you to deal with failure. And one thing you said back in 2008, after the U.S. had not qualified to wait for the Olympics, Zadek went to the first three qualifiers. He went to the fourth in Poland, and ultimately we didn't get the job done. But you said something that really stuck out to me and still sticks in my head, is that you kind of reevaluated what's really important in life, right? Could you maybe talk about that experience just real quick here? Because that really dovetails with what you were talking about in terms of failure and dealing with that.
Yeah, I mean, it was, to me, that was, 2008. At that time, I wasn't sure how long I was going to compete for, and, if I was going to move into coaching and move out into the real world. And, when you train your whole life for an opportunity to go to the Olympics, and, not even just for yourself, but now all of a sudden you have the pressure of the entire country. You're trying to qualify the weight. It's the last qualifier. And then you fall short, and you fall short, maybe even to a lesser opponent was the worst part. It was tough. That was probably one of the toughest losses that I've ever experienced, just to cope with mentally. When I got back from that trip, I had to dig deep to figure out, okay, I'm going to continue to wrestle, and I'm still going to go to the trials. I'm still going to train through it. And I made a decision that I was going to continue to compete. I came to the conclusion that I wouldn't let it stop there. And at that time, I was going to wrestle through 2012, just with some injuries that happened late that didn't happen. But it was really, really tough, and self-reflection and finding a way to jump back on the horse. I mean, it was part of it, but it's, the sport definitely can be cruel, especially when there's external pressure. And even as a youth, you feel that external pressure, or in college, because of team scores and team titles, or impressing your family. And the better you are as an athlete, the expectation or the pressure you put on yourself, like, oh, people think I'm good, so I can't go out and lose, because then what are they going to think of me? Pretty soon you're not wrestling for your goals or for yourself. You're wrestling just to accommodate people's perception of who you are. And so those are things that I think every successful wrestler probably goes through, and the really successful ones can block that out and just focus on why they're wrestling. And that's kind of where I had to go, and where I had to get after that loss. And after 2008 was, okay, if I'm going to continue wrestling, I'm going to do it for me. And if I fall short and the U.S. didn't qualify for the Olympics, that's unfortunate. But the biggest part of it is I didn't qualify for the Olympics, and that's what I'm training for.
And that's something, I think, it's just that as really the last piece of this before we shut this conversation down is, the notion of having like an external scorecard versus an internal scorecard. Like the external scorecard might be, hey, I want to win this tournament, or I want to live up to these expectations. But the reality is that if you're being the best version of yourself, like each 6-minute go or each practice or each day, and really getting the most out of your life, that's really all that should matter. And so it sounds like that was kind of the moment or an awakening you had flying back from Poland, and probably those lonely days after, where you were just kind of soul searching a little bit.
No, that's, I mean, you're spot on with that. It's, and I think whether it's wrestling or something, somewhere else in life, I mean, everyone kind of probably runs across a moment like that. And for me, that was definitely one of them in regards to where I was going to be headed in the future of the sport and how I would evaluate myself. But
yep. Well, hey Nate, real quick, 3 rapid fire questions here. We'll keep them quick, but just 3 rapid fire questions, and we'll sign off. Sound good?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right. Favorite post weigh-in food?
Olive Garden, hands down.
The breadsticks and the soup. I love it.
Yep.
Okay. Toughest match you've ever had in your life?
And this is going to be a surprise. Michael Keefe from UTC, and I did win, but he kept coming, and I think I walked off the mat more tired than I'd ever been in my entire life.
I didn't know that one. Yeah, I kind of thought maybe it'd be like Zadok at the U.S. Open or some of the weird battles, but okay. Fair enough, though. Okay, two more. Best memory of the sport. Best moment.
So for me, I would say the U.S. National Championship when I won. For me, that was probably maybe the biggest or best, accomplishment. I was extremely excited at that time, knowing that I would sit out and have a better opportunity to make the world team. I think that was in 2007.
2007, sure? Yeah, 2007.
And yep, and so I think just the win. Obviously, I beat Zadok in the finals there. I had some other tough opponents kind of leading up to that, but outside of that, I mean, winning the NCAA title just because of how many years it took me in college to get that one. That's probably a close second.
And for people who haven't watched that match, I rewatched it yesterday. The end of the match scramble with you and Zadok is epic. He snaps you down, looks like he's going to score. He gets it on a shot. You crotch lift him, and it was insane. Really great end of the match scramble. It was fun to watch.
Yeah, no, that was exciting, and I probably look back and I'm like, man, I probably should have had more personality, or maybe had a little more excitement and done things back in the day, entertainment, scored more points when I could have, and focus on maybe the fans, and but I definitely probably had more emotion in that match than I did in a lot of other ones, but it's that was an exciting win.
Definitely. All right, last question is, in one sentence, if someone asks you, why should their son wrestle, what would you say?
It may be cliche, but I think wrestling, it can teach you how to be a better person. And I think it's whether you're a man or a woman, because I have a daughter now, and I'm excited for her to wrestle if that's what
son
she
or
wants
daughter.
to do.
Yeah.
But it truly, I think wrestling teaches you to be the best person individually that you can be.
I love it, and I totally agree. Well, this is awesome, man. Nate, thank you so much for joining the podcast, man. It's been a lot of fun. We could talk obviously for hours about this stuff, but thanks again for joining, man. Really appreciate it.
That's the end of this episode, but definitely not the end of the show. For more episodes, please go to wrestlingchangemylife.org. Subscribe to us on iTunes. Give us a star rating. Show the love, baby. Show the love. Thank you so much. We'll see you again soon. Peace.